The sound of metal cutting through steel echoed across my property at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon. I was 30 miles away, sitting in a coffee shop when my phone exploded with alerts. Security breach. Perimeter violation. Police dispatch activated. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched the live feed on my phone screen. There she was, Corinne Patterson, the HOA president who had been terrorizing our neighborhood for months. She stood at my front gate with industrial bolt cutters in her hands, wearing that same smug smile she flashed whenever she handed out violation notices. She had no idea that my gate was not just some decorative barrier. She had no idea that cutting that lock would send an immediate alert to 3 different monitoring systems. She had no idea that within minutes, multiple police units would be racing toward my property, treating this as an active break-in. But most importantly, she had no idea that I had been documenting her harassment for weeks, building a case that would finally put an end to her reign of terror. As I watched her struggle with the heavy-duty lock, I realized this moment would change everything. Corinne thought she was teaching me a lesson about compliance. Instead, she was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her life. My name is David Chen, and 6 months ago, I thought I had found paradise. After years of apartment living, I finally bought my dream property. 3 acres of rolling hills, mature oak trees, and complete privacy. The kind of place where you could drink your morning coffee without hearing traffic or neighbors arguing. The property came with challenges, though. Located on a semi-rural road with spotty police response times, I knew security would be my responsibility. That is why I invested in a comprehensive monitoring system, complete with a reinforced steel gate at the front entrance. The gate was not just for show. It connected directly to a professional security company that monitored it 24 hours a day. Any unauthorized tampering would trigger an immediate police response. I thought I was being smart and responsible. I had no idea I was setting a trap for the most entitled person I would ever meet. The trouble started when our neighborhood decided to form a homeowners association. Most of us were skeptical, but the real estate market was booming and property values were climbing. A well-run HOA could protect our investments and maintain community standards. At least, that was the theory. Corinne Patterson volunteered to be president, and nobody else wanted the job. She seemed harmless enough at first. A recently retired school administrator in her late 50s, she talked about bringing order to our little community. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority, and she always dressed like she was heading to a board meeting. The first red flag came during our initial HOA meeting. Corinne arrived with a thick 3-ring binder labeled Community Standards and Enforcement Procedures. She had spent weeks driving around the neighborhood, photographing every property and documenting what she called compliance issues. My gate made her list. "Security gates send the wrong message," she announced, pointing at a photo of my property. "They make our community look exclusive and unwelcoming. We are trying to build a friendly neighborhood, not a fortress." I tried to explain my security concerns. The property was isolated, visible from the main road, and I traveled frequently for work. The gate was not about exclusivity. It was about basic safety and protection of my investment. Corinne listened with the patience of someone humoring a difficult child. When I finished explaining, she smiled that condescending smile that would become all too familiar. "I understand your concerns, David," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "But community standards must come first. Individual preferences cannot override collective decisions." I looked around the room at my neighbors. Some nodded along with Corinne. Others avoided eye contact. Nobody spoke up in my defense. That night, I went home and read every page of our HOA bylaws. I discovered something interesting. The rules Karen was citing did not actually exist. The original bylaws mentioned maintaining property values and avoiding obvious nuisances, but nothing about security gates being prohibited. When I pointed this out at the next meeting, Karen was ready. She had amended the bylaws, she explained, to clarify ambiguous language that could be interpreted too broadly. The amendments had been approved by the board in an emergency session. "What emergency session?" asked Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived 2 houses down from me. The emergency was the need to address noncompliance before it became a bigger problem. Karen replied smoothly. I realized then that I was not dealing with someone interested in community building. I was dealing with someone who craved control and would bend any rule to get it. The next morning, I found a violation notice taped to my gate. It gave me 30 days to remove the non-compliant security barrier or face escalating fines and potential legal action. Karen had just declared war. She had no idea that I was prepared to fight back. I spent the next week diving deep into HOA law and our community bylaws. What I discovered made my blood boil. Karen had been playing fast and loose with proper procedures since day one. The emergency session she mentioned never happened. The amended bylaws were never properly voted on or filed with the county. She was making up rules as she went along. I started documenting everything. Every interaction, every violation notice, every threatening email went into a growing file on my computer. I installed additional security cameras around my property, not just for protection, but to create an undeniable record of any harassment. My first official response was a certified letter to the HOA board, requesting copies of all meeting minutes, properly filed amendments, and documentation of the voting process that supposedly approved the gate restrictions. I kept the tone professional and reasonable, even though I wanted to unleash my frustration. Karen's response came within 2 days. She called me directly, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You are being deliberately difficult," she said. "This is about community standards, not your personal convenience." "I am just asking for proper documentation of the rules you are trying to enforce," I replied calmly. "That seems reasonable." "What seems reasonable," she snapped, "is following the clearly stated guidelines instead of looking for loopholes." "What guidelines? You still have not shown me where these rules actually exist in our bylaws." The line went quiet for several seconds. When Karen spoke again, her voice had shifted from anger to something more dangerous: cold calculation. "David, you are new to this community. You do not understand how things work here. I have been building neighborhoods and managing communities for 20 years. I suggest you trust my experience and remove that gate before this becomes a bigger problem." The threat was barely veiled. I had pushed back, and now Karen was pushing harder. Over the next 2 weeks, other neighbors started reaching out to me quietly. Tom Bradley, who lived at the end of our street, had received violation notices about his vegetable garden being too visible from the main road. Susan Kim got cited for parking her work van in her own driveway because it was commercial vehicle storage in a residential area. Karen was not just targeting me. She was systematically harassing anyone who did not immediately bow to her authority. The breaking point came when elderly Mr. Peterson received a violation notice about his American flag being improperly displayed. The man was a Vietnam veteran who had flown that flag for 15 years. Karen claimed it violated flag placement protocols that existed nowhere in our actual bylaws. That evening, I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting with questions and documentation. I prepared a presentation showing the discrepancies between Karen's claimed rules and our actual governing documents. Karen shut me down before I could finish my first sentence. "This meeting is for board business, not individual complaints," she announced. "If you have concerns about enforcement actions, you can submit them in writing through proper channels." "What are the proper channels?" I asked. "Submit your concerns to the HOA president for review and consideration." "You are the HOA president." "Exactly." The circular logic was maddening, but it revealed Karen's strategy perfectly. She had created a system where she was the sole authority on rules, enforcement, and appeals. She was judge, jury, and executioner for our entire community. I left that meeting knowing that reasonable discussion was impossible. Karen had made it clear that she viewed any questioning of her authority as personal attacks that needed to be crushed. 2 days later, I received a final notice about my gate. Remove it within 48 hours or face escalating enforcement actions, including potential legal proceedings and daily fines of $200. The notice was signed with Karen's flowing signature and included a handwritten note at the bottom. "Community standards are not negotiable." I stared at that note for a long time, feeling a cold anger settle in my chest. Karen thought she held all the cards. She thought her position and her aggressive tactics would force me to back down like everyone else. She was about to learn that she had picked the wrong neighbor to bully. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from Janet Morrison, the HOA treasurer, and the only board member who had remained quiet during Karen's increasingly aggressive meetings. "David, I want you to know that not everyone supports how this situation is being handled," she said carefully. "Some of us think mediation might be a better approach than these escalating violations." For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe reason could still prevail. "I would welcome mediation," I told her. "I have never wanted this to become adversarial. I just want to understand what rules I am actually supposed to follow. Let me talk to Karen about setting up a neutral discussion. Maybe we can find some middle ground." I hung up feeling cautiously optimistic. Perhaps Karen's board was finally recognizing that her tactics were creating more problems than they solved. That optimism lasted exactly 4 hours. Janet called back that afternoon, her voice heavy with disappointment. Karen rejected the mediation idea immediately. She said that offering mediation would set a precedent of negotiating with non-compliant homeowners. Her exact words were that the community needed to see consequences for defiance. The word defiance hit me like a slap. Karen was not trying to enforce community standards. She was trying to make an example of anyone who dared question her authority. That evening, I did something I had been avoiding. I created social media accounts and started researching Karen Patterson's online presence. What I found was both revealing and disturbing. Karen's Facebook page was filled with posts about problem neighbors and entitled homeowners who think rules do not apply to them. She shared articles about HOA enforcement success stories and commented frequently on neighborhood dispute forums, always taking the side of aggressive enforcement. Most telling was a post from 3 days earlier, after my attempt to speak at the board meeting. Some people think they can intimidate community leaders by demanding special treatment. They forget that leadership means making tough decisions and standing firm against pressure. Problem homeowners will learn that their tactics will not work here. The post had received dozens of likes and supportive comments from people I did not recognize. Karen was building a narrative where I was the villain, and she was the hero standing up for community values. But her most recent post, published just hours after Janet's mediation offer, made my blood run cold. Sometimes you have to show people that there are real consequences for thinking rules do not apply to them. Some lessons are more expensive than others. I screenshot everything and added it to my growing documentation file. Karen was not just planning enforcement action. She was planning something she expected to be costly and humiliating. The next day, I made a decision that probably saved my case. I contacted my security company and upgraded my monitoring package to include real-time alerts and automatic police dispatch for any unauthorized access to my gate. The technician who installed the enhanced system was thorough and professional. "This system will treat any tampering with your gate as a potential break-in," he explained. "Any cutting, forcing, or unauthorized access will trigger immediate alerts to our monitoring center and local police dispatch. Response time is usually under 10 minutes for this type of alert." I also installed additional cameras with cloud backup and upgraded my internet connection to ensure uninterrupted monitoring. If Karen was planning something dramatic, I wanted every second documented. My final attempt at peace came through a certified letter to the entire HOA board, including Karen. I outlined my position clearly and reasonably, offered to work with them on compromise solutions, and requested a formal review of the enforcement actions before any escalation. The letter was professional, respectful, and completely ignored. Karen's response came through social media instead of official channels. Her Facebook post that evening was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive hostility. Received more lengthy correspondence from a homeowner who seems to think that writing long letters will change clearly established rules. Some people just cannot accept that their individual desires do not override community standards. Change is coming whether they like it or not. The comments on that post were even more disturbing. Multiple people encouraged Karen to hold firm and show them who is in charge. One person wrote, "Maybe they need a more direct lesson about compliance." I spent that night staring at the ceiling, knowing that Karen had moved beyond enforcement into something personal and vindictive. She was not trying to resolve a community issue anymore. She was trying to destroy someone who had dared to question her authority. The irony was painful. All I had ever wanted was to understand and follow legitimate rules. Instead, I had become the target of someone who thought she was the rule. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I had no idea that Karen had already ordered bolt cutters online and was planning her direct lesson for the next afternoon. Tuesday, October 15th started like any other day. I had planned a drive to visit my sister in the neighboring county, about an hour away. It was a routine trip I made monthly, and I looked forward to the break from the mounting HOA drama. I left home around noon, my phone fully charged and my security system armed as always. The gate was locked with a heavy-duty steel padlock, the same one I had been using for months. Everything was peaceful as I pulled out of my driveway and headed toward the main highway. Karen had been watching. At exactly 2:47 p.m., my phone exploded with notifications. The first alert was from my security company, Perimeter Breach Gate Access ATTEMPTD Police Dispatch ACTIVATED. Before I could process what was happening, more alerts flooded in. Motion detected. Unauthorized access. Security system triggered. My hands shook as I pulled over to the side of the road and opened the live camera feed on my phone. What I saw made my heart stop. Karen Patterson stood at my front gate, wearing jeans and a bright red sweater, holding industrial bolt cutters like she owned the place. Her face was set in determination, that same cold expression she wore when issuing violation notices. She had positioned herself between the gate posts, clearly visible to my security cameras, and was methodically cutting through the steel padlock. The sight was surreal. This was not some masked criminal breaking into my property under cover of darkness. This was my HOA president, in broad daylight, systematically destroying my security equipment while looking directly into my cameras. She was not trying to hide what she was doing. She wanted me to see it. The heavy-duty lock put up more resistance than Corinne had expected. I watched her struggle with the bolt cutters, taking breaks to adjust her grip and wipe sweat from her forehead. She checked her watch several times, as if she was working on a schedule. What Corinne did not know was that my enhanced security system had already categorized this as a forced entry attempt and dispatched multiple police units to my property. While she was struggling with the lock, 3 patrol cars were racing across town with full emergency response authorization. At 2:52 p.m., Corinne finally cut through the lock. The steel padlock fell to the ground with a metallic clang that I could hear through my phone's audio feed. She stood back, admiring her work, and actually smiled at the camera before pushing my gate open. That smile would haunt me for weeks afterward. It was not the expression of someone reluctantly enforcing community rules. It was the smile of someone who enjoyed exerting power over others and was savoring a moment of complete dominance. Corinne walked through my open gate and stood in my driveway, looking around my property like she was conducting an inspection. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my house, my landscaping, my vehicles. She was documenting her victory. At 2:55 p.m., I heard sirens through my phone's audio feed. Corinne heard them too. Her confident expression faltered for the first time as she looked toward the main road. The sirens were getting louder, and she suddenly seemed to realize that she might have miscalculated something. The first police car arrived at 2:57 p.m., followed immediately by 2 more units. 6 officers emerged from their vehicles, hands on their weapons, treating this as a potential break-in or burglary in progress. Corinne's transformation from confident authority figure to panicked trespasser was instantaneous and complete. "Officers, wait," she called out, raising her hands. "There has been a misunderstanding. I am the HOA president, and I was just enforcing community violations." The lead officer, a tall man with gray hair and serious eyes, approached Corinne with professional caution. "Ma'am, we received an alert about unauthorized entry and property destruction. Can you explain why you are on this property and what happened to that lock?" Corinne pointed at the cut padlock on the ground, her voice rising with desperation. "I had to remove it because the homeowner was not complying with HOA regulations. The gate violates our community standards, and he refused to address the violation after multiple notices." "Ma'am, do you live on this property?" "No, but I am the HOA president, and I have the authority to enforce compliance." The officer's expression hardened. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification. Destroying someone else's property is illegal regardless of any HOA dispute." I watched through my phone as Corinne fumbled for her wallet, her hands shaking as she handed over her driver's license. The confident woman who had terrorized our neighborhood for months was now stammering explanations to police officers who clearly were not impressed with her claims of authority. "Ma'am, HOA disputes are civil matters," the officer explained patiently. "Property destruction is a criminal matter. You cannot legally destroy someone's lock, even if you disagree with their right to have it. Karen's face went pale, but the violation notices. I gave him multiple warnings. The community standards clearly state, "Ma'am, I am going to need you to step over here while we document this scene." As I watched Karen being questioned by police officers, still holding the bolt cutters that had been her weapon of choice, I felt a mixture of vindication and disbelief. She had actually done it. She had actually committed a crime on camera because she was so convinced of her own authority that she forgot about actual law. The woman who had spent months lecturing everyone about rules and compliance was about to learn what real rules looked like. The police officers at my scene were thorough and professional, while Karen stood to one side, looking increasingly desperate. They photographed the cut lock, examined the damaged gate hardware, and documented everything with the methodical precision of people who had handled property destruction cases before. "Ma'am, this is clearly criminal mischief," the lead officer explained to Karen. "Regardless of any civil dispute you might have with the property owner, you do not have the legal right to destroy his property." Karen's voice became shrill with panic. "But you do not understand. I have been trying to resolve this for weeks. He was completely non-compliant with community standards. I had to take action because he was ignoring all proper procedures." "What procedures authorize you to cut someone's lock?" Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in months, she had no answer. The second officer, a younger woman with a no-nonsense attitude, joined the conversation. "Ma'am, even if you had legitimate HOA authority, which would need to be determined by a court, property destruction is still illegal. HOA disputes have to be resolved through civil litigation, not self-help remedies." "But I am the president," Karen protested weakly. "That does not give you criminal law enforcement powers," the first officer replied. "You are getting a citation for criminal mischief, and this incident will be documented in a formal report." I was still 30 miles away, but I could see everything through my security cameras. Karen's face crumpled as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. This was not some neighbor dispute that could be resolved with strongly worded letters and HOA meetings. This was a criminal matter that would follow her permanently. The citation process took 20 minutes. Karen had to provide her personal information, acknowledge the charges, and sign documentation while still holding the bolt cutters that served as evidence of her crime. The irony was perfect. The woman who had spent months issuing violation notices was now receiving a violation notice from actual authorities. At 3:25 p.m., I received a call from Officer Martinez, the lead officer at the scene. "Mr. Chen, this is Officer Martinez with the police department. We are at your property investigating a break-in report. Can you confirm that you did not authorize anyone to access your gate today?" "Absolutely not," I said. "I am about an hour away, but I can see everything through my security system. The woman you have there is Karen Patterson, my HOA president. She has been harassing me about this gate for weeks, but I never gave her permission to touch my property. We have issued her a citation for criminal mischief. You will need to file a formal complaint if you want to pursue charges, and you should also document any property damage for insurance purposes. I will be home within the hour to assess everything. We will be clearing the scene shortly, but the report will be filed today. You should receive a copy within 48 hours." As I hung up, I realized I was shaking, not from fear or anger, but from pure adrenaline. Karen had finally crossed a line that even her most devoted supporters could not defend. I turned around immediately and drove home. The trip had never felt longer. When I arrived at my property at 4:15 p.m., the police cars were gone, but the evidence remained. My gate hung open, the cut padlock lying in the gravel like a piece of twisted metal sculpture. The entire scene looked exactly like what it was, the aftermath of a crime. I took extensive photographs from every angle, documenting not just the property damage but the symbolic violation of my security and privacy. This was not just about a broken lock. Karen had invaded my space, destroyed my protection, and demonstrated complete contempt for my rights as a property owner. My phone had been buzzing with text messages since I started driving home. Word was already spreading through our small community. "David, I cannot believe what I am hearing about Karen and your gate. Is it true? Janet Morrison. Just saw on the police scanner that someone got arrested at your place. Everything okay? Tom Bradley." "Karen is posting crazy stuff on Facebook. You should see what she is saying. Susan Kim." That last message made me curious enough to check Karen's social media while I waited for my insurance adjuster to arrive. What I found was a desperate woman trying to control a narrative that had completely escaped her control. Sometimes standing up for community values requires difficult decisions. Not everyone will understand the lengths true leaders must go to protect property values and neighborhood standards. I regret that it came to this, but some people only respond to direct action. The post had been up for less than an hour, but the comments were brutal. Even Karen's previous supporters were questioning the wisdom of cutting someone's lock. Several people pointed out that property destruction was illegal regardless of HOA authority. One comment particularly stood out. "Karen, I supported your enforcement efforts, but this went too far. You cannot break people's property because you disagree with their choices." Karen's response revealed her complete disconnection from reality. Sometimes leadership means making unpopular decisions for the greater good. Not everyone has the courage to stand up for what is right. She still believed she was the hero of this story. The insurance adjuster arrived at 5:30 p.m. and spent an hour documenting everything. The lock would need to be replaced. The gate mechanism had been damaged during Karen's forced entry, and the entire system would need to be recalibrated by the security company. "This is pretty straightforward property destruction," the adjuster told me. "Your coverage will handle the repairs, but you should definitely pursue reimbursement from whoever did this." As the sun set on what had been the most surreal day of my adult life, I stood in my driveway looking at my damaged gate and realized that Karen had given me something invaluable, undeniable proof of her character and methods. She had spent months positioning herself as a reasonable authority figure, enforcing legitimate community standards. In one afternoon, she had revealed herself as someone willing to commit crimes to maintain control over her neighbors. The woman who preached about rules and compliance had broken the most basic rule of all: respect for other people's property. By Thursday morning, Karen's crime had become the talk of our entire community. My phone rang constantly with neighbors wanting to know what had happened and sharing their own stories about Karen's increasingly erratic behavior. The most revealing call came from Janet Morrison, the HOA treasurer who had tried to suggest mediation just days earlier. "David, I owe you an apology," she said. "We should have reined Karen in months ago. What she did to your gate was completely inexcusable, but it was not completely surprising." "What do you mean?" "There have been other incidents. Things that did not get reported because people were afraid of making Karen angrier. She went onto the Peterson property to measure his flagpole without permission. She was caught going through Tom Bradley's trash to document his recycling compliance. She even tried to enter Susan Kim's backyard to photograph her garden shed. The pattern was clear. Karen had been escalating her invasive behavior for months, but this was the first time she had actually committed a crime serious enough to trigger police involvement. Why did nobody speak up about this before? Janet sighed heavily. Because most people just wanted to avoid conflict. Karen made it clear that questioning her methods would result in increased scrutiny of your own property. People were afraid of becoming targets. That afternoon, I received an email that changed everything. It was from a law firm representing 3 families in a neighboring subdivision. Mr. Chen, we represent homeowners in the Willowbrook community who are pursuing legal action against their former HOA president for harassment, property violations, and abuse of authority. We understand you may have experienced similar issues with an HOA official. If you are interested in discussing your situation, please contact our office. I called immediately. The attorney, Sarah Mitchell, explained that Karen Patterson had been the HOA president in Willowbrook before moving to our community. Her tenure there had ended when multiple families filed complaints about her aggressive enforcement tactics and apparent violations of proper HOA procedures. She was forced to resign after we documented a pattern of harassment, unauthorized property access, and financial irregularities in HOA management. When she left Willowbrook, she owed the community over $15,000 in legal fees and settlement costs. She never mentioned any of this when she ran for president here. That does not surprise me. Karen seems to believe that moving to a new community gives her a fresh start to implement the same controlling tactics that got her in trouble before. The conversation revealed something terrifying. I was not Karen's first victim. She had a documented history of abusing HOA authority to harass homeowners who did not immediately submit to her demands. Armed with this information, I scheduled an emergency meeting with our HOA board. Janet Morrison, Tom Bradley, and the other 2 board members met me at Janet's house that evening, all of them looking uncomfortable and apologetic. We had no idea about Karen's history, Janet began. If we had known about the problems in Willowbrook, we never would have supported her election. What are we going to do about it now? Asked Tom. I shared everything I had learned about Karen's previous community, the legal troubles she had left behind, and the pattern of behavior that had led to my gate being destroyed. This is not just about my property anymore, I told them. Karen has been systematically violating proper procedures since she was elected. The amended bylaws she claimed to have passed do not exist. The emergency meetings she referenced never happened. She has been making up rules and enforcement procedures as she went along. The board members exchanged uncomfortable looks. They were beginning to realize that they had been complicit in Karen's abuse of authority through their silence and inaction. We need to call for Karen's immediate resignation, said Tom, and we need to review every enforcement action she has taken since becoming president. What about the legal liability? Asked board member Mike Stevens, who had been quiet throughout most of the meeting. If Karen was acting without proper authority, the HOA could be liable for harassment claims from multiple homeowners. That sobering thought hung in the air as we discussed our options. Karen had not just committed a crime against my property. She had potentially exposed the entire HOA to legal liability through her unauthorized and aggressive enforcement tactics. The next morning, I received a certified letter from Karen herself. It was a masterpiece of deflection and blame shifting. The unfortunate incident at your property, was the direct result of your continued noncompliance with clearly stated community standards. While I regret that enforcement action became necessary, homeowners must understand that repeated violations will result in escalating consequences. I encourage you to use this experience as an opportunity to reflect on your responsibilities as a community member. The letter was signed Corinne Patterson, HOA President, and included no acknowledgement that she had committed a crime or violated any procedures. Reading that letter, I realized that Corinne was completely detached from reality. Even after being cited by police for criminal mischief, she still believed she was the wronged party in this situation. That evening, Corinne's resignation letter arrived via email to all homeowners in our community. But even in resignation, she could not admit fault. Due to the hostile environment created by certain homeowners who refuse to accept community standards, I am resigning my position as HOA president. I hope future leadership will have the courage to enforce the rules that make our neighborhood a desirable place to live. Corinne Patterson's reign of terror was officially over, but the legal consequences of her actions were just beginning. The final chapter of Corinne's story unfolded over the next 6 months, and justice came in waves. The criminal charges proceeded exactly as Officer Martinez had promised. Corinne pled guilty to criminal mischief in February, accepting a fine of $1,200, 40 hours of community service, and 18 months of probation. The conviction would remain on her permanent record. But the criminal case was just the beginning. My civil lawsuit for property damage, trespassing, and intentional infliction of emotional distress resulted in a settlement of $8,000. Corinne's homeowner's insurance initially tried to deny the claim, arguing that criminal acts were not covered, but her legal expenses mounting quickly convinced her to settle out of court. More satisfying than the money was the discovery process, which revealed the full extent of Corinne's unauthorized activities. She had been taking photographs inside people's yards without permission for months, maintaining files on homeowners that included personal information gathered from online searches, and even attempting to access county records to find enforcement leverage against her targets. The HOA itself underwent a complete transformation. Under new leadership, we revised our bylaws to include proper oversight procedures, transparency requirements, and clear limitations on enforcement authority. The new rules specifically prohibited any board member from accessing private property without explicit written permission and established an appeals process for all violations. Most importantly, we instituted background checks for all future board candidates. Corinne's history of HOA abuse in her previous community would have disqualified her immediately if we had known to look for it. Corinne and her husband quietly sold their house in May and moved out of state. I never saw her again after the day she cut my lock, but I heard through neighborhood gossip that she had applied to join the HOA board in her new community. I hope they do their background checks. My gate was repaired and upgraded with even more sophisticated monitoring equipment. The new system sends alerts to my phone, the security company, and now also to 3 trusted neighbors who volunteered to be backup contacts. Nobody will ever again be able to approach my property with criminal intent without immediate detection and response. But the most important change was not technological. Our community learned that silence in the face of abuse enables more abuse. Several neighbors told me afterward that they had wanted to speak up about Corinne's tactics, but were afraid of becoming targets themselves. The lesson we all learned was that standing up to bullies requires courage, documentation, and persistence. Karen counted on people being too intimidated or too conflict-averse to challenge her authority. When someone finally did challenge her, her entire system of control collapsed. Today, our neighborhood is peaceful and well-managed. We have reasonable rules, fair enforcement, and board members who understand that their job is to serve the community, not control it. And somewhere out there, Karen Patterson is probably trying to convince a new group of neighbors that she knows what is best for their community. I hope they are smarter than we were. I hope they ask the right questions before it is too late. Because the best way to deal with a neighborhood tyrant is to never let them gain power in the first place.